Have you ever asked yourself why so many men are drawn to women who defy the usual mold of being passive, submissive, or easy to predict? Why, when they meet a woman who holds her ground and lives unapologetically with fire in her soul, their interest becomes something deeper, an obsession? Maybe it's not about her demeanor, but about what it awakens inside them. Carl Jung believed that the traits we're most mesmerized by in others reflect what our own spirit is yearning to reclaim. So when men encounter a bad woman, perhaps what they're really seeing is the embodiment of freedom, the kind they were never taught to nurture within themselves. But what does it truly mean to be a bad woman? Is she cruel, manipulative, harmful, or is she simply whole, so complete that it unsettles those around her? For generations, society praised the woman who pleased, who waited, who bent herself to fit. And yet, there's a strange, powerful allure in the ones who refuse to be tamed. Not because they're bad, but because they're liberated. And for many men, freedom is a foreign land, daunting, wild, and magnetic. A woman who refuses to kneel becomes a reflection of all the insecurity in someone who needed to control in order to feel strong. That's when the story shifts. The man meets an archetype that rattles his ego, a woman who stands on her own, who doesn't seek his approval, who walks away without fear. And the more he tries to mold her into what he understands, the more she escapes him, like sand slipping through grasping hands. This isn't a performance, it's a sacred exchange. A dance between dominance and surrender, fear and longing, between outdated masculinity and a rising consciousness. Jung might have called this a collision with the shadow, the instant a man is forced to face what he's long buried. And that's why he returns, even after swearing he won't, even after trying to forget, replace, erase. Because what he experienced wasn't just lust, it was revelation, a stirring from deep within, a silent challenge to evolve, to shed boyhood and embrace manhood. That's what draws him back, even in fear. The bad woman isn't bad. She's the mirror, the limit, the true north. She signals the collapse of a fragile ego and the birth of a man not yet known to himself. So if you've ever been labeled difficult, cold, too intense, maybe you were the first woman to show him that love isn't about submission. It's about transformation. And even if he never voices it, his eyes, his body, and his quiet returns will always reveal the truth. A woman who sparks awakening is unforgettable. She imprints the soul, she becomes the turning point between who he was and who he just might be ready to become. It all begins when a woman chooses not to shrink to fit into a man's emotional limits. That decision, barely visible to the world, triggers a tremor within his very foundation. Jung taught that the soul is forged through encounters with what we most avoid. And for many men, that encounter has a name. The woman who refuses to submit. She becomes the living embodiment of the shadow, the force that tears through pride, control, and surface confidence. And when she says no with certainty, when she claims respect without shouting, when she leaves without drama but with grace, something breaks inside him. But what breaks isn't his desire, it's the illusion he held. He sees, perhaps for the first time, that he holds no control over her. And that realization, though painful, becomes a strange kind of addiction. Because now he's not confronting her, he's facing himself. Or rather, the part of himself he's never dared to confront, his emotional immaturity. A woman like that doesn't need to raise her voice. She echoes. She doesn't plead, she transforms. She doesn't chase revenge. She awakens. And that's why her power lingers long after she's gone. Her silence becomes louder than any words. When she walks away, she doesn't just leave the room, she takes the mirror with her. And without that reflection, he's directionless. Jung once said that true love doesn't complete you, it reveals you. And when a man is exposed by such love, one that holds up his emotional immaturity without blame, that woman unknowingly becomes the origin of a new awareness. Still, this connection is rarely recognized for what it is. Many women find themselves asking, why does he pursue me so fiercely, only to pull away like he's afraid? Why is he afraid of me? The answer lies in the fear of what real change demands. To love a liberated woman, a man must surrender his grip on control, let go of his inflated ego, and release the illusion of power. He must unravel the version of himself he's always known, and that unraveling hurts. That's why he flees, that's why he denies, deflects, and searches for a replacement. But nothing fills the space she once held, because what he lost wasn't just a lover, it was an awakening. Their connection was the collision of his ego with her essence, and in that impact, a deeper emotional journey began, one that only a few men dare to complete. But the ones who do are forever changed. Even if he never comes back, even if he never admits it, she remains, etched into his memory as the woman who showed him who he could have become, if only he'd chosen growth over comfort. There's an invisible war between what he feels and what he dares to face. Standing before a woman who won't shrink, he's flooded with sensations he can't name, a chaotic mix of longing, frustration, and a quiet, seething rage. But it's not her he's angry at. It's himself, for realizing that his tools no longer work. Charm, control, promises spoken but never lived, all useless now. As Jung once said, the ego becomes desperate when it cannot control what it desires. And here he is, desperate. He desires her with a fire that wants to possess, yet he's powerless to conquer her. This isn't a love story, it's a reckoning. Not between two lovers, but between his ego and her soul. She is a living question mark. Her autonomy unsettles him. Her peace disorients him. Her absence, it crushes him. And he doesn't understand why. She never begged, never pleaded, never clung to the edge of his attention. So why does he feel gutted? Because deep inside, her every boundary pierced through the emotional armor he spent years building. With each quiet refusal, she cracked the image he had of himself, the idea of the strong man, the provider, the one in control. But beneath that image was something weaker, scared, performative. And now, the mask no longer shields. It suffocates. His greatest fear isn't losing her. It's being forced to stand bare before someone he can't impress, someone who sees beyond the act and demands the truth. The tension tightens. He knows, even without admitting it, he can't deceive this woman. She sees him in his entirety. She sees his posturing and his silence, his overreactions and his quiet fragility. That gaze is more frightening than rejection because it doesn't meet the man he pretends to be. It sees the man he's been hiding. And for an ego addicted to dominance, that kind of transparency is unbearable. So he leaves, not because he doesn't want her, but because he can't stand the mirror she holds. He retreats to comfort, to women who overlook, who don't challenge, who mistake crumbs for care. But she asks for nothing, and yet her presence demands everything. And what she asks for, he still doesn't know how to give, his soul. When she leaves, her silence is louder than any word. There are no texts, no accusations, just absence. But this absence isn't empty. It's a weight, a symbol. Jung believed that the unconscious speaks in symbols. And that's exactly what she becomes. Not just a woman, but an archetype, a threshold, a reckoning. In the echo of her absence, he begins to think, truly think, maybe for the first time in his life. Pride resists, it whispers excuses, it recasts her as too demanding, too intense, too cold. But deep down, something in him no longer buys it. Because he knows, all she wanted was presence, all she asked for was truth, all she needed was a man willing to love without control. Now every memory of her becomes sacred. The steadiness in her gaze, the silence she kept when others would have screamed, the grace with which she said goodbye. It all returns, puzzle pieces he fumbles to reassemble, too late. And this reflection, it's not sweet, it's not romantic, it's devastating, because now he sees what he lost. But more than that, he sees what he never dared to become. He didn't protect her, he tried to possess her. He didn't love with strength, he sought dependency. He didn't build something lasting, he played a role. And now that truth corrodes him from within, because she was the first one who wouldn't play along. She didn't stay to fix him, she left to protect herself. And it's in that moment that something inside him shatters. The illusion of emotional superiority dies, and he sees he wasn't strong, he was scared, he wasn't magnetic, he was manipulative, he wasn't bold, he was small. But this breaking is where it begins. Jung said that real self-knowledge starts when we stop blaming others and start facing the shadow within. And she was the disruption that made it possible, not because she hurt him, but because she saw him. It wasn't that she was harsh, she was just honest. It wasn't that she was cold, she was clear. It wasn't that she was difficult, she was complete. And a complete woman terrifies only the man who's not yet ready to meet himself. He never truly learned to look within, because she didn't want a savior, a father figure, or a man who sought to possess her. She wanted someone whole, someone with the courage to walk beside her, not ahead, not behind, but beside her. A man with a bare soul, a steady heart, and truth in his eyes. And now, he understands all of this. But he understands it alone, because every real transformation begins with loss. And no loss cuts deeper than the one that forces a man to confront the darkest parts of himself. Carl Jung once said, "What we reject most in ourselves is what controls us the most." And when that man loses the woman who would not bend, the woman who remained rooted in herself, no matter how he tried to sway her, he loses more than love. He loses the illusion of who he thought he was. Confronted him not with accusations, but with silent gestures and an unwavering presence. And that's when he finally begins to feel, truly feel, on his skin, what he spent his life avoiding, the hollow ache of his own emotional immaturity. It's not her absence that pierces him, it's the truth she unearthed within him. That truth is where the pain begins. And that pain is the beginning of something unfamiliar, yet necessary. Slowly the fortress begins to fracture. Anger softens into shame. Escape turns into yearning. Pride dissolves into contemplation. And where once stood a man cloaked in layers of armor, now stands someone exposed, stripped of illusions that once kept him protected, but also far from his own soul. The woman he once labeled as difficult was, in reality, the only one who ever truly saw him. And it's that clear, unwavering gaze that starts to shift everything. Not because she tried to fix him, but because she made him face himself. And to truly see oneself is a revolution of the soul. It's not romantic. The soul cries, the ego twists, the mind pleads to go back to its familiar scripts. But it can't. Because once a man has known a whole woman, he can never return to fragments. She becomes the measure. After her, everyone else fades. No other presence silently dares him to rise. None so gently lays bare the wounds he's concealed for a lifetime. None reach so deep, and that depth leaves a scar, not of harm, but of remembrance. A quiet symbol that whispers, change is overdue. So the man begins to dismantle his inner scaffolding. He no longer chases validation in applause. He seeks meaning in the stillness. He lets go of the craving to be wanted and starts longing to be real. Not weaker, more human. And from there, real strength is born. Jung said, there is no awakening without pain. The process of individuation, the journey of becoming one's truest self, demands we look into the shadows. She was the match that lit that path, and even from a distance she remains. Not as a fantasy, but as a compass for who he might still become. The transformation isn't a strategy to win her back. It's no longer about her. It's about him now, about reconstructing himself from truth, not performance. About abandoning the exhausting need to impress and learning instead to live in alignment. He begins to understand that love, when it's real, never bows to the ego. Because real love, the kind that liberates, the kind that mends and awakens, can only bloom after the mask falls. When the authentic self finally rises, and when the ego crumbles, everything shifts. The world isn't the same, and neither is he. The man who once lived for admiration now yearns for connection. What he used to see as a battlefield of power, he now recognizes as an invitation to vulnerability. He begins to understand. The woman who once unsettled him wasn't arrogant, she was whole. It wasn't that she was too much, it was that he had not yet matured enough to meet her there. Jung said healing begins when we look at what hurt us with the eyes of understanding. And that's exactly what is happening now. She didn't leave a wound, she left a mark, a signpost. The man he is becoming doesn't show up with rehearsed promises. He arrives with presence. He's no longer fixated on being the answer. He's learning how to hold space for the questions. He understands now, loving someone is not enough. Love must be nourished with maturity. And he finally sees, the woman who shook the foundation of his identity never wanted to be rescued, conquered, or persuaded. She wanted to be seen in her depth, honored in her truth, and held in her strength. That is only possible when a man lays down the armor of superiority and chooses, humbly, to be real. This new way of being doesn't announce itself in grand declarations. It breathes through silent actions. He no longer begs. He simply shows up. He doesn't seduce. He supports. He doesn't perform. He surrenders. Because now he knows. A true woman isn't moved by power or empty promises. She is moved by the man who can stay rooted in his truth when everything in her soul calls him to rise. Respect is no longer a tactic. It has become part of his being. Admiration no longer feeds vanity. It flows from recognition. Desire no longer arises from ego. It has become communion. But along this path, he also understands something quietly devastating: that he may have arrived too late.
That she may have already closed the door he refused to walk through when it was wide open. That in order to save herself, she had to let go of trying to save him. And instead of anger, what stirs now is reverence. Because he finally sees the value of the love she offered, and the cost she bore for being the only one who truly saw him. Jung said not every encounter is meant to last. Some arrive only to awaken us. And that awakening, even if it comes wrapped in loss, is its own kind of miracle. He no longer asks for forgiveness. He doesn't plead for return. He doesn't romanticize the reunion. He simply walks forward, with a heart that's clearer, a soul that's more honest, and a quiet, enduring gratitude for the woman who entered uninvited, exposed what was hidden, tore open what was numb, and left. Because sometimes that's exactly what love does. It doesn't stay to comfort. It arrives to awaken. It doesn't promise forever. It destroys the false so that the true may be born. Now, for the first time, he is ready to love. Maybe not her, but himself. Truly, deeply, without needing to perform or pretend. And only from there, from the ground of self-acceptance, from the ashes of his former illusions, can any other love be real. She became a milestone in his emotional timeline, not because of dramatic declarations or unforgettable moments, but because of the silence she left behind. A silence that continues to echo with meaning. And no matter how many years pass, no matter how many other bodies lie beside him, no one will ever take the place of what she represented. The turning point, the awakening, the invitation to become, not just a better man, but a true one. Carl Jung once said that certain archetypes cannot be erased, only integrated, and she was exactly that. An archetype, not of fantasy, not of perfection, but of truth. She was not sent to complete him, but to deconstruct him, not to soothe, but to stir. She didn't arrive to fill the emptiness. She simply held up a mirror and showed him that the void had always been there. She didn't fit into the narrative he'd created for himself, where love is soft, predictable, and controllable. She was the storm before the clarity, the silence that screamed. Her presence was not comforting, it was confronting. And in that confrontation, something ancient began to stir within him, something raw, something real. He may try to forget her, to rationalize her away as a lesson, a phase, a mistake. He may dive headfirst into new stories, into new voices, into the warmth of different bodies. But none of them will be her, because she was never just an experience. She was a revelation. She was a mirror. And mirrors that reveal our deepest selves are never forgotten, even when they hurt, even when they strip away our defenses, dismantle our pride, and drag us into a place where our vanity, superiority, and illusion fall silent. She lingers, not in the way nostalgia lingers, but like a scar across the soul, both a reminder of the wound and of the healing that began with it. The woman he once tried to tame was, in truth, the beginning of his liberation. She didn't demand he change, she demanded he see. And that seeing was what changed everything. She showed him where he was asleep, where he was hiding, where he was faking it. It took him years, maybe decades, to understand. But when the understanding finally came, it struck with the force of clarity, undeniable and irreversible. She wasn't difficult, she was necessary. Now, when her name passes like a shadow through his mind, when a phrase she used to say replays in the quiet, when he sees a flicker of her depth in someone else, but only a flicker, he understands. He understands that not all pain is a loss, some pain is a seed. And she had planted those seeds, unintentionally, perhaps unknowingly, but with purpose. And they bloom now, in his choices, in his silences, in his restraint, in his presence, in the way he now listens, in the way he touches the world with more reverence. She was the last woman he encountered in the era of his sleep, and the first he saw through the eyes of his awakening. That's not something he'll confess out loud. Perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of protection, or maybe because he knows she no longer fits the man he is today. But in the private sanctum of his soul, in that place untouched by roles and ego, he holds her memory like a sacred text. Not to read again and again, but to remember the transformation she sparked. She wasn't just a woman. She was a revelation, a threshold, the embodiment of what he could have lived if only he had been ready. And now that he is, now that the masks have been stripped away and he has nothing left to prove, he knows. He knows that some people don't come into our lives to stay. They come to awaken. The woman he once called too much, too emotional, too strong, was never too anything. She was whole, and wholeness is terrifying to the half-built.
But once touched by it, you're never the same. Even if the path never converges again, what she stirred within him will echo for the rest of his life. Because some women pass through, but others awaken. And she was that awakening. The one he spent a lifetime unconsciously avoiding. The one he didn't know he needed until it was too late. Some encounters fade with time. But there are those rare seismic meetings that do not fade. They remain. Not because of drama, but because of depth. Not because of clinging, but because of what they revealed. Like footsteps in wet concrete, they harden into memory, into identity. She doesn't shout in his memory. She whispers. Whispers through the quiet moments, through the cracks in his day, through the stillness between relationships. And that whisper is not a haunting. It is a compass. The woman once labeled difficult was never the opposite of love. She was its fiercest expression. Love in its rawest form does not always soothe. It exposes. It breaks illusions. It dismantles ego. She didn't destroy him. She revealed what in him had never been true to begin with. And that revelation, it continues to shape him even now. Within him now lives a different man. A man with new eyes. A man who no longer dances for validation. A man who no longer bows to performance. A man who listens, not to respond, but to understand. Who touches, not to conquer, but to honor. He is no longer dazzled by surface. He no longer flinches from depth. He has shed the masks that once made him charming but hollow. Because in touching the limits of his own ego, he discovered the doorway to his soul. Carl Jung wrote that the true loving encounter happens when two consciousnesses recognize one another. Maybe she was the only one who truly saw him, saw the part of him even he couldn't name. And maybe that's why it hurt so much. Because once seen, we can never go back to being invisible, not even to ourselves. And that's the truth. Awakening, no matter how painful, is never in vain. Some men will continue to run from women, from love, from themselves. They'll blame, they'll deflect, they'll seduce but never surrender. But the few who choose to turn around and face the mirror, those are the ones who evolve. They will come to see what he has now come to understand. He didn't lose a woman. He was given an initiation, a rare, holy invitation to rebuild. Not for her, not for anyone, but from within. To rebuild from what aches, from what challenges, from what unsettles, from what forces humility and evokes awe. That's where true freedom lies. Not in escape, not in pride, but in self-awareness. Because there is no real love where ego still rules. That woman, she was a quiet revolution, and revolutions never ask for permission. They erupt, they burn away the false, they shake the foundations, they leave behind a different landscape. So if you're listening now and you feel something stirring deep within you, something nameless, something powerful, it may be time. Time to stop chasing others. Time to stop looking outward for answers that live within. Time to sit with your own silence. Time to walk beside yourself before walking beside anyone else. Because the kind of love that truly transforms us doesn't comfort us. It calls us up. It dares us to rise. It demands we shed the layers we've outgrown. It doesn't coddle the ego. It breaks it, so the soul can speak. And sometimes the one you thought was your obstacle was actually your key. The one you blamed for your pain was your portal to freedom. She wasn't your enemy. She was your initiator. So if this message touched something sacred inside you, something you've been trying to bury, don't turn away. Let it move through you. Let it awaken you. Let it remind you of who you are when the mask falls. Let it remind you of who you could be if you stopped pretending you were already whole. And if you feel called, speak, write, share. Because your story may be the mirror someone else needs. Your pain may be the seed of someone else's transformation. Because this isn't just about one man and one woman, this is about all of us. About awakening, about healing, about finally becoming real. And if you're still haunted by the one who saw you before you saw yourself, know this: they didn't leave you empty. They left you open, and that is the beginning of everything. The person who sees you with the eyes of the soul will never forget what they saw, and neither will you.